The fluorescent lights of the downtown convenience store buzzed overhead as Mark Townsend counted the crumpled bills in his wallet for the third time. $15.37. Enough for milk, bread, and maybe a small bag of apples for his daughter Emma's lunchboxes this week. At 34, Mark had perfected the art of stretching every dollar until it screamed, a skill born from necessity rather than choice. His calloused hands, marked by years of construction work, handled the worn bills with the same careful precision he used when tucking Emma into bed each night. The rain drummed against the store windows as Mark glanced at his phone. 11:47 p.m. Emma would be fast asleep by now, her curly hair spread across the pillow like a halo, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant they'd rescued from a thrift store last Christmas. Mrs. Chen, their neighbor, had agreed to listen for Emma while Mark worked his second shift at the loading dock. It wasn't ideal, but single fathers in his position didn't have the luxury of ideal. They had survival, determination, and love that could stretch further than any paycheck ever would. As Mark stepped back into the rain, plastic bag clutched against his chest to protect the bread from getting soggy, he heard it. A woman's voice, sharp with fear and alcohol, cutting through the sound of rain and distant traffic. I said, "Leave me alone. I can get home myself." The voice came from the shadowy space between two buildings, where the streetlight barely reached and the rain created a curtain of privacy that some people mistook for invitation. Mark paused, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Son, there are moments in life when you can choose to be the person who walks away or the person who steps forward. Choose carefully, because you'll have to live with either choice for the rest of your life." Three men had cornered a woman against a brick wall, their laughter crude and predatory as they ignored her protests. She wore a business suit that probably cost more than Mark made in a month, now wrinkled and rain-soaked. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around her face, and even in the dim light, Mark could see the way she swayed slightly, alcohol making her vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with character and everything to do with circumstance. Mark set the grocery bag down carefully, protecting it from the rain with his jacket, and approached with the steady calm that came from years of diffusing tense situations on construction sites. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people pause. "Everything okay here?" The three men turned toward him, sizing up the interference. Mark wasn't particularly large, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced down much worse than drunk strangers in dark alleys. "This doesn't concern you, buddy," one of them said, his words thick with alcohol and entitlement. "The lady was just about to come with us for a nightcap." "The lady was saying no," Mark replied evenly, pretty clearly from what I could hear. He looked directly at the woman, noting the relief that flickered across her face despite the fog of alcohol. "Ma'am, do you want to go with these gentlemen?" Julie Parker, though Mark didn't know her name yet, straightened slightly against the wall. Even drunk and frightened, there was something in her bearing that spoke of strength, of someone used to commanding rooms and making decisions that affected hundreds of people. "No," she said, her voice gaining strength from Mark's presence. "I want them to leave me alone." The standoff stretched for a moment, tension thick as the rain that continued to fall. Mark didn't move from his protective position, and gradually the three men seemed to realize that their fun had been effectively ended. They muttered insults and complaints as they wandered away, their bravado evaporating in the face of someone willing to stand witness to their behavior. As their footsteps faded into the Friday night sounds of the city, Mark turned his attention to the woman who remained pressed against the brick wall, shaking from cold, alcohol, and the aftermath of fear. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently, maintaining enough distance to avoid seeming threatening while staying close enough to help if she stumbled. Julie shook her head, then immediately seemed to regret the motion as it sent the world spinning around her. She pressed one hand against the wall to steady herself, the other fumbling in her purse for something that might restore order to a night that had spiraled completely out of control. "My phone," she mumbled, her words slurred but understandable. "I need to call a car." Mark watched as she struggled with the simple task of unlocking her phone, her fingers unsteady and uncooperative. The rain continued to soak through both their clothes, and he could see that she was in no condition to navigate the complexities of ride-sharing apps or even providing a coherent address to a driver. "Let me help you get home safely," Mark offered, his tone careful and respectful. "No obligation, no expectations, just making sure you get inside somewhere warm and secure." Julie looked up at him through rain-dampened hair, her eyes trying to focus on the stranger who had appeared when she needed help most. In her world of corporate boardrooms and strategic negotiations, kindness often came with price tags and hidden agendas. But something in Mark's weathered face and steady gaze suggested a different kind of person entirely. "Why?" she asked, the question encompassing more than just his offer to drive her home. Mark considered the question seriously, thinking of Emma asleep in her bed, of the world he wanted her to grow up in, of the kind of man he wanted to be for her sake as much as his own. "Because someone did the same thing for my mother once," he said simply, "and because it's the right thing to do." The honesty in his answers seemed to cut through Julie's alcoholic haze. She nodded slowly, accepting his offer not because she had no other choice, but because she recognized something rare in the middle of a terrible night. Genuine kindness, offered without expectation or agenda. Mark retrieved his grocery bag from where he'd set it down, noting that the bread had stayed dry under his jacket. His truck, a 15-year-old Ford with rust spots and a heater that worked most of the time, sat parked under a broken streetlight 2 blocks away. As they walked through the rain together, Julie leaning slightly on his arm for balance, Mark wondered about the woman beside him. Her clothes spoke of success and status, but her vulnerability reminded him that money couldn't protect anyone from all of life's dangers. The truck's interior smelled of work boots and coffee, with Emma's art project supplies scattered across the back seat. Mark cleared rain-soaked newspapers from the passenger seat and helped Julie buckle her seatbelt, treating her with the same gentle care he used with his daughter when she was sick or scared. "Where do you live?" he asked as he started the engine, hoping it would turn over reliably despite the damp weather. Julie managed to provide an address in the Pearl District, one of Portland's most expensive neighborhoods, confirming Mark's suspicions about the gap between their economic circumstances. The drive through the rain-slicked streets gave him time to observe his passenger in the dashboard's dim glow. She had dozed off almost immediately, her head tilted against the window, her breathing steady despite the alcohol in her system. At her building, Mark helped Julie to the entrance where the doorman recognized her and took over her care. "Thank you," she said, her voice clearer now, though she still moved carefully. "I mean it. Thank you for stopping, for helping. Most people would have walked away." Mark nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Just get inside safely. That's payment enough. Saturday morning arrived with Emma's laughter echoing through their small apartment as she attempted to flip pancakes without Mark's help. Flour dusted the counter, and there was probably more batter on her clothes than in the pan, but Mark watched from the kitchen doorway with the contentment that came from simple moments of joy. They were cleaning up the breakfast dishes when Mark's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Townsend?" The voice was professional, female, and somehow familiar. "This is Julie Parker. We met last night, though I'm afraid I wasn't at my best. You helped me when I really needed it, and I wanted to thank you properly." Mark's memory clicked into place. "I'm glad you're okay. You don't need to thank me for anything." "Actually, I do," Julie replied, and Mark could hear something in her tone that suggested this conversation was important to her in ways that went beyond simple politeness. "Would it be possible for us to meet? I'd like to buy you coffee and discuss something with you." Mark glanced at Emma, who was now arranging her stuffed animals in what appeared to be an elaborate tea party. "I have my daughter with me today. If that's okay with you, we could meet somewhere family-friendly." "That would be perfect," Julie said, and Mark could hear genuine warmth in her voice. Pioneer Square buzzed with its usual Saturday energy when Mark and Emma arrived at the designated cafe. Emma skipped beside him, her hand warm in his, her eyes wide with the excitement that new adventures always brought her. Mark spotted Julie immediately, seated at a corner table near the cafe's large windows. She looked completely different from the vulnerable woman he'd helped the night before. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional style, her clothes were expensive but casual, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to when she spoke. "Mr. Townsend," she said, standing to greet them, "and you must be Emma. Your father told me you were beautiful, and he was absolutely right." Emma beamed under the attention. "Daddy makes really good pancakes," she announced. Julie laughed, pulling out crayons for Emma, apparently having come prepared for entertaining a 7-year-old. As they settled into their seats, Julie waited for Emma to begin coloring before addressing Mark directly. "Friday night, you helped me in a way that went far beyond what most people would have done. You saw someone in trouble and chose to get involved, even though it would have been easier and safer to walk away." Mark waited, curious about what had prompted this meeting. "I work in nonprofit management," Julie continued, "specifically with organizations that serve vulnerable populations. Children, families in crisis, people experiencing homelessness. I'm opening a new community center in Southeast Portland. It will provide services for single parents, job training programs, after-school care for children whose parents work multiple shifts." She looked directly at Mark. "I've been looking for someone to manage the day-to-day operations, someone who understands the challenges our clients face because they've lived them, someone who has the natural instincts to help people without judging them." The offer that followed was more generous than anything Mark had dared to imagine. A salary that would eliminate his need for second and third jobs, benefits that would ensure Emma's security, the opportunity to help other families navigate challenges he understood from personal experience. "Why me?" Mark asked. "There must be hundreds of qualified candidates with better credentials." Julie was quiet for a moment, watching Emma add flowers to her colored menu. "Because Friday night, when I was at one of the lowest points I've experienced in years, you reminded me that good people still exist in the world. You restored my faith in humanity when I desperately needed that restoration." She looked back at Mark with an expression that combined professional assessment with personal gratitude. "Character can't be taught, Mark. Skills can be learned, but character is something you either have or you don't. Friday night showed me you have it in abundance." Emma looked up from her artwork. "Daddy, are you getting a new job?" Mark looked at his daughter, then at Julie. "Maybe, sweetheart. Would that be okay with you?" Emma considered this seriously. "Will you still make pancakes on Saturday mornings?" "Always," Mark promised, and Emma nodded her approval. Over the next hour, Julie outlined the position details and her vision for their impact on Southeast Portland's struggling families. Mark listened with growing excitement, asking questions while Emma decorated everyone's napkins with flower gardens. "I'll need to think about this," Mark said finally. "Take all the time you need," Julie replied. "But Mark, Friday night wasn't just chance for me. I've been praying for the right person to help me build this program, and then you appeared exactly when I needed to remember why the work matters." That evening, Mark sat at his kitchen table surrounded by bills and responsibilities, Julie's business card beside his coffee cup. He thought about the man he wanted to be for Emma, about the example he wanted to set for her. Mark picked up his phone and dialed Julie's number. "Julie," he said, "I'd like to accept your offer. When can I start?" Her joy was audible. "Monday morning, if you're ready. Mark, I think we're going to accomplish something really special together." Monday morning brought nervous energy as Mark prepared for his first day. The community center stood in a converted warehouse in Southeast Portland, its brick walls and large windows speaking to both industrial history and future possibility. Julie met Mark at the entrance, her excitement about the project evident in every gesture. Over the following weeks, Mark discovered that his instincts for helping people translated naturally into program management. The families who came to the center carried stories similar to his own, struggles with childcare and employment, with making ends meet on inadequate incomes. Mark's ability to understand their challenges without judgment made him effective in ways that formal training might not have achieved. Emma adapted to their new routine with childhood resilience, spending her after-school hours at the community center where she quickly became the unofficial mascot. She read to younger children, assisted with art projects, and charmed everyone from volunteers to board members. As the center's programs developed, Mark found himself working closely with Julie on strategic planning. Their professional relationship deepened into genuine friendship, built on shared values and complementary skills. The center began winning recognition for its innovative approach to family services and its measurable impact on local poverty rates. 6 months after starting, Mark received a call from his former construction supervisor offering him a job with twice his current salary. Mark declined without hesitation. The work he was doing now felt essential in ways that went far beyond financial compensation. That evening, as he and Emma walked through their neighborhood, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Daddy," Emma said, "Julie told me that helping that lady in the rain was like planting a seed, and now we have a whole garden of good things growing." Mark smiled at his daughter's metaphor. "I think maybe we should plant more seeds," Emma replied. "Not just for us, but for other people, too." A year later, the community center hosted its first annual fundraising gala. Mark, uncomfortable in his borrowed suit but proud of their accomplishments, found himself in conversations with people who wanted to replicate their model in other cities. When it came time for Mark to address the crowd, he felt nervous but determined. "A little over a year ago," he began, "I was working multiple jobs just to provide the basics for my daughter. I thought success meant having enough money to pay the bills and maybe take Emma out for ice cream once in a while." The audience listened with attention that came from recognizing authentic experience. "Julie Parker changed our lives by offering me the opportunity to use my own experiences to help other families facing similar challenges. But this work changed me as much as it changed our circumstances. Every day I get to see people discovering their own strength, finding pathways to stability, building better futures for their children." Mark looked at Emma, who was beaming with pride. "My daughter is growing up understanding that success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, but about what you contribute to your community." Later that evening, Mark and Julie stood outside his apartment building, the evening's success still glowing around them. "Thank you," Julie said quietly, "for taking a chance on something that probably seemed impossible." Mark considered this, thinking about faith and possibility. "I think impossible things happen when the right people find each other at exactly the right moment." Over the past year, their working relationship had evolved into something deeper, a connection built on shared values and mutual respect. "Mark," she said, her voice carrying nervous hope, "would you maybe like to have dinner sometime? Just us, I mean." Mark looked up at his apartment windows where Emma was safely sleeping. "I'd like that very much. Emma's been asking when you're going to come over for our famous pancakes anyway." 2 years later, Mark stood in the same alley where he had first encountered Julie, but now the space looked entirely different. The community center had expanded to include a satellite office in this building, and what had once been a dark corner where predators lurked was now a well-lit entrance where families came seeking help. Emma, now 10, stood beside him holding flowers from their garden. Today marked the anniversary of the night that changed everything. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just walked past that night?" Emma asked. Mark considered this seriously. "I think some moments are tests of who we really are, and the person I wanted to be for you couldn't have walked past someone who needed help." They walked through the neighborhood that had become their mission field, past houses where families they had helped were building stable lives, past the school where Emma was now a peer mediator. At home, Julie was cooking dinner, wearing the apron Emma had made for her. They had married 6 months ago in a small ceremony at the community center. Emma had been Mark's best person, standing beside him as he promised to love the woman who had seen his potential when he couldn't see it himself. Over dinner, they discussed the day's events at the center and Emma's upcoming school projects. "I got a call today from the mayor's office," Julie mentioned. "They want to feature our program in a national conference on poverty reduction. Our model is being studied by cities across the country." Mark felt pride tempered by humility. The real satisfaction came from daily knowledge that their work was changing lives. "This story belongs to both of us," Julie said, looking at Mark with love and partnership. After Emma had gone to bed, Mark and Julie sat on their front porch, watching the neighborhood settle into evening rhythms. The house across the street belonged to a family that had come through their job training program. "Do you remember," Julie asked, "when you asked me why I was helping you?" Mark nodded, remembering that conversation in the rain. "My mother was a single parent too," Julie continued. "One night when I was about Emma's age, she got stranded downtown when her car broke down. A stranger helped her get home safely and refused payment. That man's kindness probably saved our lives, but more than that, it showed my mother that good people still existed." Mark understood now why his decision to help had mattered to Julie beyond simple gratitude. He had honored a legacy of kindness that had shaped her understanding of how strangers could become family. "Your mother raised an amazing daughter," Mark said, taking Julie's hand. "She would be proud of what we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence, thinking about the future that stretched ahead. Emma would grow up with opportunities that would allow her to pursue whatever dreams her mind conceived. The community center would continue growing, and they would continue learning how to love each other and their community with intentionality that had transformed a moment of crisis into a lifetime of purpose. "Mark," Julie said quietly, "there's something I wanted to tell you. The State Foundation wants to fund a statewide expansion of our model. They're offering enough money to open centers across Oregon." Mark felt his breath catch. "They want you to direct the expansion. You would oversee training, help communities adapt our model, ensure our values are maintained." The offer represented recognition beyond anything Mark had imagined. More importantly, it represented the chance to multiply their impact exponentially. "What do you think?" Julie asked. Mark looked out at the neighborhood that had become their laboratory for social change. "I think some opportunities are too important to decline, even when they scare you." Julie's smile illuminated her face. "Emma's going to be so excited." Over the following months, Mark traveled across Oregon, training new staff and helping communities implement programs that honored both efficiency and dignity. Emma often accompanied him, serving as a living example of how children thrived when families received support. The success attracted national attention. The model was studied by policymakers who recognized its potential for addressing poverty at scale. Mark found himself presenting to federal agencies, sharing insights gained from lived experience combined with effective program design. 3 years after that rainy night, Mark stood before a congressional committee, explaining how community-based approaches could transform social services. Emma, now 13, sat in the gallery, watching her father testify about the importance of treating families with dignity while providing practical support. "The key," Mark told the committee, "is understanding that poverty is not a character flaw. People experiencing economic hardship are hardworking individuals facing impossible choices with inadequate resources. Our job is to provide pathways to stability, not to judge people for needing help." After the hearing, Mark and Emma walked through Washington, D.C., past monuments to leaders who had shaped American history. Emma would start high school next year, probably with scholarship opportunities that would allow her to pursue whatever career called to her. "Dad," Emma said as they paused near the Lincoln Memorial, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Mark considered the question Emma had asked in different forms throughout her childhood. "I think the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right places at the right times, but only if they're willing to recognize the opportunity and act on it." Emma nodded, looking out at the reflecting pool. "I want to be the kind of person who recognizes those opportunities." Mark put his arm around his daughter, feeling the pride and gratitude that had sustained him through every challenge. Emma had grown up understanding that privilege came with responsibility, that personal success meant nothing if it wasn't connected to community service. Walking back through the Capitol, Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Julie, who was in Portland overseeing another center expansion. The message contained a photo of the alley where they had first met, now transformed into a pocket park with benches and flowers. Below the photo, she had written, "Some seeds grow into forests." Mark smiled, understanding their story was far from over. Emma would build her own life of service. He and Julie would continue developing new approaches to social change, and somewhere in communities across America, families were discovering their own strength with help from programs that had grown from one man's decision to stop and help a stranger in need. The circle of kindness that had begun in a Portland alley continued expanding, creating ripples of hope that would touch lives not yet born, in places not yet imagined, always connected to the simple truth that had guided Mark's choices from the beginning. Everyone deserves to be seen, helped, and given the chance to build something beautiful from whatever circumstances they inherit. Walking through the nation's capital with his daughter, Mark understood their real legacy would not be measured in programs created or policies implemented, but in the countless individual moments when people chose compassion over convenience, when strangers became family, when ordinary kindness transformed into extraordinary change.